So let's talk about the underlying issue here, because we had a gentleman who was head of Border Patrol, really, I think, under you, actually, say there is an issue with the southern border, and there is a plan that's been developed by the professionals on how to do it. What do we need to do down there?
Well, first, David, there's so much misinformation around immigration, illegal immigration, and border security that every once in a while you have to go back to the basics with the facts. Fact. Illegal migration on our southern border is a fraction of what it used to be. The high was fiscal year 2000. There were 1.6 million apprehensions on our southern border. Later, it's been 300,000, 400,000 in that range, thanks to an improved economy in Mexico and investments we've made in border security over the last 18 years. More surveillance, more boats, more roads, more drones, more aircraft, more border security agents, and more wall and fence in the places where it makes sense to have wall and fence across the terrain of the southern border. Meanwhile, even though illegal migration is a fraction of what it used to be, the demographic has totally changed. No longer is it single adults from Mexico. It's now women and children from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, which presents challenges to the system. Clearly, when you have children, families streaming across our border at 20, 30, 40,000 a month. And so you ask any border security expert, what more do we need? They'll tell you a mixture of things. More surveillance, more roads, more aircraft, more boats, more mobile surveillance, more aerial surveillance, and perhaps additional fortification of fence and wall in the places where it makes sense.
And if you look at the plan, at least the outlines of the plan, because I haven't read the whole 1,000-page bill, but the outlines of what the appropriators, both from Democrats and Republicans, agreed to, it includes those components. It's got some physical barrier. It also has humanitarian assistance. It's got more personnel down there. It's got electronics. So is that a sensible plan from what you know of it?
The big thing that I'm pleased I saw in the bill was an investment in eradicating the poverty and violence in those three Central American countries. Lesson learned on my watch was that as long as you fail to address the underlying push factors of illegal migration, we're going to continue to see this problem no matter how much we invest in border security in our country. And so we started down this road a couple of years ago with an investment in Central America, and I'm pleased that the Congress recognizes that they need to continue to do that, because we just simply have to address the push factors.
Where do we go next? Because we just heard from the president this morning, and he said, okay, fine, I'm signing that bill. That's $1.375 billion for the barrier part of it, and then additional funds. But in addition to that, I'm also signing this order declaring a national emergency. Correct. And as I understand it, he wanted $5.7 billion. He got $1.4 billion, and so he's going to take $8 billion. Right. It's basically the way it's working out under this national emergency. What happens next?
Well, first, I think it's highly significant that on a bipartisan basis, a Republican-controlled Senate, a Democratic-controlled House, this is what comes out in their negotiations, $1.375 million for border security. That includes, the Republican-controlled Senate as well as the Democratic-controlled House led by Speaker Pelosi. The additional funding that the president wants comes from a mixture of things, which includes the declaration of a national emergency, whereby he will take money away from various military construction projects and put it toward building the wall. That, in my judgment, is a very risky and perhaps even dangerous precedent, because Congress zealously guards how the Department of Defense spends its money for military construction. There's a whole separate subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee in Congress dedicated to the oversight of how we spend what we call MilCon. And to take money out of that account and put it towards something else by an executive action is going to be controversial, I suspect.
So explain that to those of us who don't understand the military budget, because you were General Counsel of the Department of Defense before you were at Homeland Security. You know this area certainly much, much better than I do. The president, when asked about this today in the news conference, said, oh no, the military budget's so big that taking a few $1 billion away from it is not going to make a difference. Don't worry about it. Essentially is what he said. Why do we need that money for military construction?
Well, first of all, every nickel of the Department of Defense budget is spent someplace, it's allocated someplace, and there's almost always a congressional advocate and sponsor for every dollar of defense spending. So if you pull $2 billion away or $2.5 billion away from some important military construction project, which goes directly to supporting our military, to supporting our national defense, there are going to be a lot of questions raised. And the thing I used to tell lawyers at the Department of Defense is if we invoke a specific statutory authority in a very aggressive way, Congress will just change the law so that it won't be there next year when you go to try to invoke it again.
So let's talk about that. The president volunteered what he thought would happen next. He said, I'm going to get sued. Speaker of the House has said she's going to sue him. We have the governor of California saying he's going to sue him. So he says he's going to get sued. This is what he had to say about the results of that.
The order is signed, and I'll sign the final papers as soon as I get into the Oval Office. And we will have a national emergency, and we will then be sued, and they will sue us in the Ninth Circuit, even though it shouldn't be there. And we will possibly get a bad ruling, and then we'll get another bad ruling, and then we'll end up in the Supreme Court, and hopefully we'll get a fair shake, and we'll win in the Supreme Court, just like the ban.
So putting aside for
not exactly optimistic, is it?
No, that's right. But putting aside his obvious distaste for the Ninth Circuit, he's been on that subject before. He says ultimately the Supreme Court will uphold him. Is he right?
Well, that's a very good question. And traditionally, the courts have given the executive branch, the president, the Secretary of Homeland Security in the right context, a lot of deference in making these sorts of executive calls about national security, what's necessary for national security. But what we've seen in the Trump administration is that the courts, when they perceive an overreach by the executive branch, do tend to get involved and want to try to right the ship so that there's a proper separation of powers. And so we saw that with the travel ban and a number of other things that have happened in this administration. And so this is why the president is pessimistic about his own chances in the courts.
What about the Congress? Because there are people up on Capitol Hill that are not just Democrats, also some Republicans who are really upset about this. Among others, Marco Rubio is saying there's a real problem. Are there things that Congress could do to curtail this?
Well, first of all, the specific authority in law that the president has invoked, they could rewrite, they could amend, they could revoke altogether. Because the president is intruding on a legislative prerogative. You know, political science 101. Congress appropriates the money and the executive spends the money. The executive doesn't get to second guess the Congress about how money should be spent. And that's a big problem.